You might have, if you follow Donald J. Trump on Truth Social, woke up to this message. This is a great time to buy Donald J. Trump. Now, Truth Social is a social media platform owned and operated by Donald Trump and his, DTJ Inc. And it is a social media platform for his supporters and people who, think like him. It is where he posts most of his updates, and then those updates will sometimes get reposted on other social media platforms, and the news media will follow. This came from his temporary ban from Twitter, which, after being reversed by Elon Musk, did not cause him to completely relocate to the platform because he had already started up his own media company, so social media company in Truth Social. So, in sending out this message, the people that are going to be receiving it are going to be his followers. Now, down the road, other people, as time passes, maybe they'll hear about it in reports in the newspapers. But if you saw this message before the announcement of his big change in tariff policy, it was because you are a Trump supporter, almost certainly, or a heavy, heavy, heavy Trump watcher who goes even to his social media platforms to read all of his updates. And so he posts this, and a few hours later, Donald Trump pauses his tariff hike on the vast majority of nation states, the over 60 countries that he has placed tariffs on, for 90 days, lowering their tariff hikes to 10%. Now, I do just want to clarify that for countries like Ukraine, or for other countries, a lot of which who were already below the trade deficit levels that they're trying to target, and certainly below the tariff levels of 10%, they were already getting 10%. There's a lot of countries that were still getting 10% and are now going to continue to get 10%. So nothing's changed for them. Like, for example, Ukraine. But other nation states like Vietnam have seen a reduction of their much higher 30 to 40% tariff rate to a 10% tariff rate. Now, this has only been for the vast majority of countries, not all of them. China, the People's Republic of China, actually got a different reaction. They actually got a tariff increase well over 100%. It was at 104. If you add the Venezuela 25% addition, then it was 129. Now it's going to be increased on its default to 120 something, which means that if you add the Venezuela tariff, we're getting higher and higher and higher. Point is, he's escalated tariffs on China. China is going to escalate its tariffs on us in response, going well over 100%, which covers 50% of the world economy, but not 80 to 90% of the world economy. And if you wanted to see the message that came out from Donald Trump's announcement, here it is. We'll read it so you guys get an idea of the brilliant thought process that went into this. Based on the lack of respect that China has shown to the world's markets, I am hereby raising the tariff charged to China by the United States of America to 125%, effective immediately. At some point, hopefully in the near future, China will realize that the days of ripping off the USA and other countries is no longer sustainable or acceptable. Conversely, and based on the fact that more than 75 countries have called representatives of the United States, including the Department of Commerce, Treasury, and the USTR, to negotiate a solution to the subjects being discussed relative to trade barriers, tariffs, currency manipulation, and non-monetary tariffs, and that these countries have not, at my strong suggestion, retained in any way, shape, or form against the United States. My God. This is why you need to pay attention in English class. Talk about a run-on sentence. I have authorized a 90-day pause and a substantially lowered reciprocal tariff during this period of 10%, also effective immediately. Thank you for your attention to this matter. I once again need to remind you that these are not reciprocal tariffs because Vietnam had a tariff of 1.1%. These are tariffs in response to trade deficits. And they have evaluated that any country that has a trade deficit with the United States, excluding service, by the way, as in the service economy, which we provide a lot of, which then also bloated the trade deficits we had around the world larger than what they actually were. We then use that number to calculate what the tariff rate should be. So it's not based on actual tariffs or trade barriers or the specifics about the markets within their country and what restrictions are placed upon us. It is largely calculated based upon trade deficits. And that would mean poorer countries, that means countries with a lower GDP per capita, people with lower purchasing power per the individual, like Vietnam, which cannot, say, consume Ram F-150 trucks the same way that the American market can, will not be able to buy the type of products that we produce, but we will be able to buy the products that they produce because we can buy them quite cheap. And so we're essentially saying that any relationship where we're the stronger economy and another country cannot buy our goods, and we're saying, and this is going to be the case a lot when it comes to raw minerals and, for example, I don't know, coal or lithium, aluminum, copper, these types of minerals. If we're importing all these raw minerals from these countries that cannot produce complex goods and do not have that infrastructure built yet, we're going to have a trade deficit with these people. And we're going to treat it as if they're treating us unfairly, and therefore we need to tax them, even though we're taking those raw minerals and developing them into highly refined goods in the United States, helping our own economy. So again, it's not a reciprocal tariff. It is a punishment for any existence of trade deficits, be them fair or not fair. The existence of them in and of themselves is an evil to this administration that must be targeted. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, a 10% tariff rate amongst a bunch of countries that still don't deserve them, still not good, still an undue tax on American consumers, still a tax placed on Ukraine for no reason, still a tax placed on the Penguin Island for no reason, still a tax placed on many, many, many countries that don't even have trade deficits with us for no reason. We're still going to keep that 10%. So that's not good. But the reduction of it from 40 and 30 and 35 here, 33 there for all these different countries, and the possibility of future negotiation, even though over 50% of the world economy is constrained within the United States and China, and they're still engaged in an ever-escalating trade war, because of these lowering of the tariffs, it caused a Wall Street stock buy boom, or at least a quick gain. So Wall Street bought up a huge amount of stocks that were lost over the period that these tariffs have been implemented. And we've gone back over 40,000 for the Dow Jones. The S&P is back up, and we've almost recovered the majority. Well, no, we've recovered the majority, almost the entirety, but the majority of what has been lost through the stocks. Now, let's be clear. That's for like the S&P. That's for the Dow Jones. If you're Apple, the situation might be a little different because you produce a lot of iPhones in places like China where you have, tons and tons and tons of factories that cannot just be quickly removed and moved over to the United States, where it would still cost a lot more to produce these. These gains to most stocks have seen a big recovery in the stock market, though. And so this is something that Trump and a lot of those around him are hailing as a gigantic achievement and basically the art of the deal. Here is Trump talking about the market going up and recovering a lot of what the tariffs made us lose in the first place.
You got the market seeing your brilliance.
Yeah, that's up almost 7 points. 2,500 points. Yeah. Nobody's ever heard of it. It's going to be a record.
Amazing. Yeah. You make an announcement the next day. Yes, sir.
Nobody's ever heard of it. Wow. My gosh. You know this feels like? This feels like I just stepped on a nail and I'm going through blood loss, right? I'm going through blood loss after I stomp my foot on a nail purposefully, right? And then after I bleed out half to death, somebody comes up and rushes a bunch of blood into my system and I recover. And then afterwards, I decide to brag about, wow, look how quickly I regained, my footing with all that blood. I mean, look how that must be a record, the amount of blood I took into my system. I mean, okay, you dug the hole and then filled up the hole. What has been achieved? And let's also point out, and there's a reason I started with this. If he announces to his supporters to buy up stock before he does policy changes that shoot up stock options, do we have to have the open conversation now about market manipulation for profiteering? Of Trump trying to financially reward his supporters? I mean, we already saw that this supposedly strong, businessman's market that, allows people to pull themselves up by the bootstraps is talking about providing subsidies for farmers to deal with the fallout of these tariffs. We know that's being talked about. And so what we're going to see is these people come out here and brag about coming to save the economy and the big gains that came out, and we'll listen to a little bit more of that in a second. But the only people that gained from this are those that took his advice, his supporters, to buy up stocks before he announced policy changes. Those are the only people who made money off of this. Oh, and probably O'Reilly's Auto Parts. Let's listen to Trump talk about this a little bit more, about his logic that went into reversing these tariffs, caving on these tariff policies after his administration had so solidly said they were not going to do it. And they might deny how committed they were against reversing this, but they were committed as of 24 hours ago.
Credibility, Mike, because you said that these tariffs would go into effect on Monday. You said no pause, and today there is a pause. So how can people believe your words today?
It's not a question of that. You have to have flexibility. I could say, here's a wall, and I'm going to go through that wall. I'm going to go through it no matter what, and keep going, and you can't go through the wall. Sometimes you have to be able to go under the wall, around the wall, or over the wall. These guys know that better than anybody, right? You got to go around them sometimes. You're not going to go through them. So I consider, I think in financial markets, because they change. Look how much it changed today. We went from, pretty moderate today, but over the last few days it looked pretty glum, to, I guess they say it was the biggest day in financial history. That's a pretty big change. And I think the word would be flexible. You have to be flexible.
Again, you slit your own throat and then doctors save your life. That's not an achievement. It's an achievement on behalf of the doctors. It's not an achievement on behalf of the person who gave themselves the self-inflicted wound. Also, if you're curious about the decision-making that went behind this, Scott Bessent, the administration's Treasury Secretary, he just said no in relation to, like, hey, what logic went into reversing this decision after you guys were solidly saying you wouldn't? And again, if you're like, oh, I mean, what do you mean solidly saying they wouldn't? Here is them literally just yesterday saying they were not under any, they were not considering a delay. They were not considering, and by the way, this is a pause. It's not permanent. It's a 90-day pause, meaning that we could very well end up in the same situation after 90 days. But it was said yesterday that it was fake news, the idea they were even considering this.
The president was asked and answered this yesterday. He said he's not considering an extension or a delay. I spoke to him before this briefing. That was not his mindset. He expects that these tariffs are going to go into effect. And there will be a 90-day pause on the reciprocal tariffs as these negotiations are ongoing, and the tariff level will be brought down to a universal 10% tariff. Many of you in the media clearly missed the art of the deal. You clearly failed to see what President Trump is doing here.
We're just too stupid, and she's just too smart for us. Anyway, here is them trying to be asked after she says the art of the deal. You guys missed the art of the deal. You guys don't understand the logic that is going into this reversal. Here is them being asked to explain the art of the deal and refusing to.
Terry Bessent, can you explain more of the decision making on Terry Bessent? Can you explain more of the decision making on what feels like a reversal here? I mean, just these went into effect less than 15 hours ago. These tariffs. Why the pause now? What led to that?
No. Again, President Trump created maximum negotiating leverage for himself, and which tariffs went into effect 15 hours ago? The ones that we have lowered went into effect a week ago. They were announced a week ago, and we have just been overwhelmed by the response from mostly our allies who want to come and negotiate in good faith. So this was driven by the president's strategy. He and I had a long talk on Sunday, and this was his strategy all.
All right, this was all a part of the plan, guys.
This was driven by the president's strategy. He and I had a long talk on Sunday, and this was his strategy all along. And that, you might even say that he goaded China into a bad position. They responded. They have shown themselves to the world to be the bad actors, and we are willing to cooperate with our allies and with our trading partners who did not retaliate. It wasn't a hard message. Don't retaliate. Things will turn out well.
But some countries did retaliate. And this is the thing, right? Okay, so first off, We've shown the world that China are bad actors. We tariff them, they tariff us back. That's not the message. The message received from that isn't, wow, China's such a bad actor. China's currently reposting Ronald Reagan speeches about free trade and trying to basically be the world's favorite little neoliberal in front of the whole world. They're not, I mean, look at this. The posts against the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. Like, this is like, what do you mean that they've presented themselves this nefarious act? Nobody's seen that on the world stage. The other countries that are getting tariffed are in the same stupid boat that they're in. And now, okay, and the policy of like, look, just don't retaliate and everything will be fine. So it was just like, let Trump get it out of his system. Let him play roulette with everybody's 401ks. And once he gets it out of his system and he feels like a big man, then we'll just have a 10% across the board tariffs and concentrated industry tariffs as well. I refuse to believe it. I refuse to believe that this increased the leverage. In fact, I would say that there's a possibility that this has decreased the leverage. There's a possibility it's decreased the leverage because I think on one hand, the Trump administration might see it like, wow, we just showed ourselves to be wild cowboys. But another way to view it as is they just showed their pain threshold. And you want to know what I think the pain threshold is? You want to know what I think is the real reason that they backed off of the tariffs? Okay. I know saying the real reason could be a simplification, but I do think this is one of the biggest contributing reasons. I think it's the bond market. So I don't know if you guys know anything about the bond market, but basically US bonds are these securities that people could purchase that give you very, very low returns, but are seen as extremely safe. And so big economic conglomerates, big business, we'll just say that to be, to dumb it down, will come in and put a lot of money on these securities because, that's how you get more from it. You have to put a lot down to get a lot back because, again, very slow returns because of how safe they are. Now, these allowed the U.S. government to continue to, borrow and keep these bond yields low, because if you keep the bond yields low, that means the debt and the interest that needs to be paid can also stay lower. Now, these bonds have been increasing, and they've been increasing since April 5th. And ever since these tariffs have been continuing to escalate, it's been getting worse and worse and worse, especially since April 7th. And we have seen within a week, the bond go from 4% to 4.5%. It's come a little bit down again to like about 4.4, going 4.35. But that 5-point increase, it does not sound like a lot. Let me tell you, it is a lot. It is a whole lot. A 0.5% bond yield increase is significant. It means that we need to pay more and they have to pay less, the people who are taking these securities. And this also means higher interest rates, which is going to be harder for credit card consumers or for people trying to get mortgages. Higher yields could mean higher interest rates, which has a bunch of downflow negative effects on the rest of the economy. And Donald Trump is somebody who's always wanted to keep the interest rates low. And he would often argue with the Fed and talked about how much independence the Fed should have over this argumentation over the interest rates. So what I think happened is that once the stock market kicked the bucket and we had some big drops and we were talking about entering a bear market, a bunch of the big business folk, we'll just call it that, started taking their money out of these securities because they had to cover these losses. And by taking these money out of these low yield securities, what that meant is that they bled. And because they bled and people were taking their money out of it, the yield prices increased, which then can lead to increased interest rates. The rest is history. So what we're talking about right here is the U.S. debt becoming less sustainable, interest rates rising after a shock move of the bond market. And I think this right here was a much bigger motivator for the Trump administration to back off than the vast majority of other factors, whether it be personal calls from this or that businessman, J.D. Vance whispering in his ears, the advice of his Treasury Secretary, Bassett, or any, commentary from foreign leaders, even though they did talk quite a bit about, all the countries that called to make concessions and how, that was a big motivator and it had a big impact on them. And then they were asked, would you please tell us who those countries were that caved and said they would give you all this? And they said no, they weren't going to do that. But if you look at Trump, he was talking about the bond market. When he was looking to finally reverse these tariff decisions and caved on these tariffs, which they were talking about as permanent fixtures of the American economy in order to help bring these jobs home, he reverses it after he starts talking about how the bond market's strong and how the bond market is beautiful.
Saxolotl got a Tier 1 subscription. This is all according to the Kikaku. Note, Kikaku means plan.
Thank you so much for the Tier 1. And he starts, basically praising the bond market. That the bond market's strong. Don't worry about the bond market. It's all great. Bessett came out to say, hey, don't worry about it. They're not systematic. It's just convulsions. It's convulsions. Don't worry. Don't worry. It just has to do with some very large leverage players, and it's nothing systematic. The threat of an extended trade war across much of the world's economy, which is still, we're having an escalating trade war with China and the United States, over 50% of the world's economy, combined with all of these, all of this capital being taken out of these securities, led to the bonds going up. And the possibility of increased interest rates and the unsustainability of U.S. debt, I think, scared the Trump administration and made them back off at least a lot of the tariffs in order to figure out how they could advance on tariffs while also not causing a bond crisis, not causing an economic crisis. And so that's why I think he's digging in his heels on China to not completely back off and look too weak, while also caving on a lot of the other tariffs to adjust to this. And if you listen to Trump and what he says about why he pulled back, he seems to be pretty honest about it. And when I say honest about it, I mean as honest as you can get from him. He's not going to say, hey guys, this is a bad idea. And no, what he's saying is, I don't even know if he thinks it's a bad idea still. I think if he could, he'd still do it. What he said is that people are getting a little too, his words, not mine, yippy. 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 Whatever that means, you will have to decode it. But what I have tried to determine, or at least what I figured out, is he thinks that people are a little antsy. They're nervous, they're skittish, and he is scared, or at least he didn't say he's scared, but he's concerned about how yippy, how skittish, how anxious people are about the economy and the lack of consumer and investor confidence, and so he's going to reel it in. Which to me, whether he says it or not, is basically an admission that the public were not ready for that type of a trade war. The public were not ready for these large, expansive, revolutionary tariffs, bringing back the ghost of McKinley. Not the late ghost of McKinley, not from the end of his life when he said that it was actually a bad idea, but before he learned his lesson. Before he learned his lesson. And let me just say, while this recent announcement of the tariffs being brought back, it's good for people's 401ks, it's good for the S&P, it's good for my grandmother's retirement. These are good signs. The trade war with China is still escalating. We just announced that our tariff rate on the Chinese are going to increase to 125%. The Chinese already have an 85% tariff placed on American goods. We can now expect that to increase well over 100%. These are affecting American small businesses, and that is still well over 50% of the world's economy if you cover all of the United States and China. And so if that continues to escalate with no end in sight, while that 90-day clock on the pause starts to tick down, that's going to still sap investor confidence. And so we might be able to tread water, but I don't think we're going anywhere upwards. Because until investor confidence is restored by giving them a clear vision of the future, people are not going to put their money down. Also, if you had any hope that House Republicans would step in the way of Trump's tariff war, House Republicans are using a rule for the budget resolution to turn off the privilege for any resolution dealing with the trade war, meaning that nobody can file a disapproval resolution up until September 30th, even if Trump decides to place, I don't know, 1,000% tariff on China. Probably not a good trend. Not a fan, personally, not a fan. Relevant Loaderbox tweet. He tweeted out that meme, right? The circle? No, not the circle.
Any questions?
Mr. President. The European Union to the markets today, and would you be open to a pause in tariffs to allow for negotiation?
Nope.
Well, we're not looking at that. We have many countries that are coming to negotiate.
If he pauses it makes him lose strength.
Okay, Asman. He lost strength. And I mean, he's not wrong. He basically showed a pain threshold. And maybe that's not what they intended to show. Maybe that's not even what they really showed. I think it is. But showing your pain threshold, making it so your negotiating opponent knows how hard they have to push you, it does remove a certain amount of perceived leverage. Remember what I was saying about the bonds earlier? How I think it was the bonds that caused Trump to cave? Well, we got an update. This apparently was posted slightly after we started going live and talking about today's economic updates. According to Fox News, it was Japan whose sale...
WFC Champ has donated $5.
Thank you very much. According to Fox News, it was Japan whose sale of American bombs yesterday forced Trump's hand to announce a 90-day suspension of tariffs.
Well, I mean, because of the mixed messaging, how can you doubt them? I mean, let's be clear what happened. Who capitulated here and why? And I don't want to say this because I'm a patriot. I'm an American. But it is the White House who capitulated based on everything I hear and all my sources. And the reason why is because of the bond market and what happened last night. Bessent knows this better than anybody. When you have yields on the 10-year rising to 5%, stuff starts shutting down. When you have the lending markets screwed up. By the way, who was dumping the bonds? Somebody asked them if it was China, right? Mm-hmm. It wasn't. It was Japan. While he was negotiating with Japan, according to my sources, who are running major money management firms that are involved in the bond market, without giving up names, Japan was dumping bonds because they believed this was not a great place to do business. That forced their hands. Now, what you can say, I think, legitimately here, is Trump decided to take the win. And here's why. There was overwhelmingly, deal potential here among the entire world, except for maybe China, right? Everybody really wanted something. So he did take the win, but make no mistake about it. Peter Navarro was talking as of yesterday about not taking the win, and now they did. And it's all because of the bond market. I want to point.
So to be clear, he's calling a win because they're going to get something out of negotiations. It's not a win until we see what they got in the negotiations. Because what was offered previously, which I thought was more than fair, by the Vietnamese offering to get rid of all of their tariffs on American goods. Now, that's not a lot. We're talking about a 1.1% tariff, but that's still a 1.1% tax. The Europeans offered a 0 for 0, which is something that Elon actually jumped on. And he said, this is a great idea. But that was something that, Donald Trump's aides were going out and saying we don't want to do because we need to restructure the American economy, bring these jobs back. But if this was the inconsistency in Trump's messaging, and I think it was meant to strengthen it, but I don't know.
WFC Champ has donated $5. Bombardino Crocodilo or Trollalero Tralala.
Thank you for the $5. I don't understand the message, but I got money, so yay. But I mean, until we see a concession, until we see what it is, calling it a win, I don't know about that. I mean, stocks were able to regain most of what they lost, not all of it. Probably, if things continue in a positive way, then maybe they will. But the tariff war with China is still escalating. And that's still 50% of the world's economy. So saying that he take the win as if there is a win to yet take outside of what has been previously talked about, the getting rid of the 1.1% tariff, free trade deals with Europe. These aren't things that I'm against, but was all of this commotion, the impacts on bonds, the risks to people's IRS, people's 401ks, the all the economic chaos, the zapping of investor confidence and consumer confidence, was it all worth it? No. Not to get rid of a 1.1% tariff rate that we lied about. No, I don't think it was. Especially if we're also getting rid of our own stuff in return. Either way, I mean, yes, the administration blinked. It's just a question of what exactly we're going to get from blinking yet. Don't call it a win until you open your hand and see what's in there. Outside of that, the trade war with China is still escalating. And so while stocks have recovered, you could very well in the near future, depending on how it goes, see them stagnate or go back down. Let's hope for the best. You know what? I don't think I'm going to vote for Trump again. I don't think I'm voting for him again. Who's with me?